Now let's talk about how you can get your hands on a copy of SQL Server Data Tools, or SSDT. Now I mentioned in a previous video, I think it was entitled SSIS Basics, that when we do complex data movements or complex data transformations, we need to use SQL Server integration services. And integration services is available to us for the purpose of SQL Server, kind of in a new form this time around. I'll talk about this in the Visual Studio video, but it's available in a couple of different forms. If you download the newest released version of Visual Studio 2012 Professional Edition or higher, you will get SQL Server Data Tools included. It'll already be there. And you'll go into the business intelligence portion, that kind of project in Visual Studio 2012. And then, once you've worked with SQL Server Data Tools inside there, you can see information about automatic updates and all sorts of things. So if you don't have Visual Studio 2012 Professional or higher, and you don't have SQL Server Data Tools there, then you can download it from www.microsoft.com and it can be installed. Now, there's all kinds of scenarios here. Let's say you have Visual Studio 2010 Professional Edition or later, and notice I said Visual Studio 2010. Well, if I download the SQL Server Data Tools and install it, Visual Studio 2010 will pick it up. If I have Visual Studio 2010 or 12 on my computer and I install SQL Server 2012 and I check Data Tools on the installation, it will automatically kind of hook that into my Visual Studio that's already there. But the bottom line is you're going to need some version of Visual Studio to run this. Now, some of you are saying, but wait a minute, I don't even have Visual Studio and I don't know anything about it. Well, not to worry, just hang on, okay? If you go out to Microsoft.com, you can search for SQL Server Data Tools download, and you can get this thing as an ISO. There's lots of different ways to grab it. You can do an internet-based installation, just kick it off and then go find something to do, and I'll talk about more of that in just a minute. Now, what if I don't have Visual Studio installed and I don't want to go through the hassle of installing Visual Studio because I'm never going to do any programming or anything like that? If I just download the SQL Server Data Tools from Microsoft's website and just kick off the install, if there's no Visual Studio there, it will install what's known as the Visual Studio Integrated Shell. This is kind of a stripped down version of Visual Studio. It'll give you just enough of Visual Studio to run the SQL Server Data Tools integration services functionality. What it will do is it will download and install Visual Studio Integrated Shell first, then it'll download and apply Service Pack 1 to that, and then it will install SQL Server Data Tools into the integrated shell environment. If you go this route, though, you will not be able to do Visual Studio's programming languages in this environment. So keep that in mind. If you're a developer and you want to get all this in one place, then either install Visual Studio 2010 or 12 Professional or higher, then install the Data Tools. Or if you install Visual Studio 2012 Professional or higher, you'll already have the Data Tools. Okay, I hope I haven't confused you here, but just keep in mind. Also take note, this is a 1.7 gigabyte download, so it's not like this thing's going to pop down in just 30 seconds or so. Now, there is also, I want to let you know about this resource, there is a SQL Server Data Tools forum out there on Microsoft's website. Notice the link here, social.msn.microsoft.com, forums, EN-US SSDT threads. But you can go out there and look, and there's all kinds of information on the ins and outs. This is a new product. I don't want to bash it, but it is kind of a new idea, a new way of doing things, and there are some undocumented features, if you know what I mean. So anyway, very easy to get SSDT, but it is a bit confusing if you've been around SQL Server for a while. Now, before I leave you, let me give you the system requirements for the Data Tools. Really, you only need to be concerned with the operating system. If you're running SQL Server or Visual Studio, you're probably good to go, but watch for these type questions on the exam. You basically need Windows Vista Service Pack 2 or above. Then you'll need Windows 7 Service Pack 1 or above if you want to go the Windows 7 route. You can use Windows 8 release to manufacturing or later, and it'll be way later by the time you see this. And then you can do Windows Server 2000 or later, Windows Server 2008, the different versions, Service Pack 1 or R2 or any of that stuff. And then of course you got Windows Server 2012 now. You can do that as well. So SQL Server Data Tools, it's a little different, can be confusing. I'm going to do a separate video on Visual Studio because this is so vastly different from prior versions. But that's kind of the bottom line on getting your hands on SQL Server Data Tools. And we're going to use this to build those complex data transformations.